Hi, everyone. We'll just wait a few more minutes to let everyone else into the Zoom call. Thank you. All right. Well, welcome, everyone. So good to have you here with us today for our session. I'm going to begin and acknowledge that I'm on Ngunnawal and Ngambri country here in Canberra, and they're the traditional custodians of the land that I'm fortunate to live and work on. I want to extend my respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples who are joining on the session today. As we are all joining virtually, I encourage you all to reflect and do your own acknowledgement of country. You can feel free to pop that in the chat there. I'm Amy. I'm a senior RAP officer here with Reconciliation Australia. I'm a proud Métis woman from Treaty 6 territory in Western Canada. And I'd also like to acknowledge and pay respects to my ancestors from Turtle Island, or otherwise known as North America. So today is a feature on RA's program Narragunnawali Reconciliation in Education that supports schools and early learning services to develop RAPs. It is also an opportunity for the education sector and broader RAP network to learn about how their organizations can continue to engage in education initiatives for reconciliation. So a quick overview of today's session. We'll have a presentation from Alanna and Sarojni, who are part of the Narragunnawali team. And then we'll follow that with a discussion with myself and Alanna and Sarojni, and we'll include time for questions for those of you who are watching. So I'd like to welcome Sarojni and Alanna to join me here and share a little bit about their presentation.
Good morning, everybody. I hope everybody's having a lovely day. Welcome to the presentation. I would like to start off with a little clip about what Narragunnawali is. So please enjoy the video.
The lands on which we live and learn hold many stories. Some new, some old, some yet to be heard, some yet to be told. Narragunnawali, named after the Ngunnawal word, meaning alive, well-being, coming together and peace, is a program designed by educators for educators and everyone in the community. Schools and early learning services can get involved by embracing our land's deep history and fostering knowledge and pride in Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples, cultures and contributions. Reconciliation action plans can be developed through the Narragunnawali online platform to guide educational institutions to make commitments to reconciliation in the classroom, around the school or service, and with the community. Professional learning and curriculum resources are on hand to support educational communities build relationships, strengthen respect, and create opportunities. Whether you're a principal, teacher, parent, student, or community member, your journey is important, and Narragunnawali is here to guide you every step of the way. Reconciliation Australia invites you to join the Narragunnawali community and be a part of the national movement towards reconciliation. Together, through education, we're shaping Australia's next chapter.
Well, what a lovely film. So here at Reconciliation Australia, we have several programs, as you well know. We have the Indigenous Governance Program, the reconciliation action plan program that's specifically tailored for workplaces, and we have the Narragunnawali Reconciliation and Education program, which specifically tailors for schools and early learning services. As we go through, I'm just going to define the two programs just to make sure that we're all on the same page. So a RAP structure, the workplace RAP structure and the Narragunnawali has the pillars of governance, relationships, respect, opportunity, and those are our 5 dimensions. Now, moving forward, we always ask the question, what is reconciliation? Now, this comic here is a little bit old. It's from the 1997 from a Streetwise comic. And if you read there, there's actually quite a few people chatting about what it means to them. And as you can see, there are different opinions and there's different sort of thoughts around what it means. And at the end of the day, there is no one definition of what reconciliation is, and it means different things to different people. Here at Reconciliation Australia, we define reconciliation through 5 dimensions. Here we've got race relations, equality and equity, unity, institutional integrity, and historical acceptance. If you're wanting to learn a little bit more about that, have a look on our website and read the State of Reconciliation report. At the Narragunnawali team, we deep dive into reconciliation through these activities. I myself manage the education RAPs. We've got professional learning, regional engagement, curriculum resources, evaluation, and our national awards.
Thanks, Sarojni. So as we know from from the latest Reconciliation Barometer, that more of us are believing, which is really encouraging, that it's important for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander histories and cultures to be taught in schools. And so what we wanted to outline on the next couple of slides is to really demonstrate that some of these, this particular finding is relevant in these ways, and that we have these national frameworks which are supporting this type of work as well. So as you can see on this slide, the Australian Professional Standards for Teachers is mainly in focus area 1.4 and 2.4. We can see that it is imperative and actually essential for every teacher who's teaching in an Australian school to be able to prove that they have strategies for teaching Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander students, and that they understand and respect, as we saw on that last one there, a little bit more about reconciliation too. So not only is it about Australian National Standards for Teachers, but we also have it in the Australian curriculum as well. So what we're actually teaching to students, and that is namely through the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander histories and cultures cross-curriculum priority. And so what's expected from that is not only teachers are being expected to include that type of knowledge in their own professional development and how to be a teacher, but also what they actually need to be teaching in every classroom in, across our country too. So we also know that it's in our early learning frameworks as well. So in terms of this being supported by the national frameworks of what is expected in schools and early learning services, it's really cool to see that this is being supported. And Narragunnawali is, while we understand that teachers and educators really need to adhere to these national frameworks which are supporting this type of work, this is where Narragunnawali comes in to be able to support teachers and school communities be able to do this in effective ways. As we can see here again in the National Quality Standard with collaborative partnerships with families and communities, and then also in the early years learning framework in that recognising diversity and actually articulating for Australia particularly, that includes promoting greater understanding of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander ways of knowing and being. So it's good to know from the perspective of this is what's actually being expected in our schools and early learning services. So just a bit of background knowledge there.
So as we look at the workplace RAP framework and the Narragunnawali framework, we've actually mirrored the workplace RAP framework to have relationships and respect and opportunity. And we've done this through embedding it in the classroom, around the school, and with the community. Now, with the commitments that we're asking our schools and early learning services to undertake fit within these components. So a good example, which is one of the minimum requirements, is flying the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander flag, which then leads on to, as you can imagine, building relationships with community. This then can create a conversation around cultural competence for staff, which fits, as you know, relationships in the school. And then these are some of the other commitments that we have. So there are a minimum of 14 and altogether 40. So we've mapped all these commitments of relationships, respect, opportunity within the classroom, around the school, and with the community.
And as we saw on that last slide, Narragunnawali is not only fitting in with those, as we said, national frameworks which are existing, but we've also created a framework for RAPs, as you would have seen there, the relationships, respect and opportunities. But for schools in particular, that is in the classroom, around the school and with the community. So we've adapted that to really suit a school and early learning service environment, also as in a sense of a workplace, but also a place where that type of learning, there's a couple of stakeholders that we need to think of. And also that, as we know from the RAPS program broadly, reconciliation is about bringing whole scale change in really systematic and also meaningful ways. So logically kind of capturing that holistic picture and figuring out, oh, we're doing these areas really, really well, and we have a lot of strength in these particular areas, and it's easy to map when you can see it like that. But then you can also see that there's all these sometimes areas that we also need to strengthen. So it's allowing the RAP process through schools and through to Narragunnawali allows schools and early learning services to map some of that and go, oh, here's where we need to work on. So you're probably going, okay, they're talking about a framework, they adhere to these national other things and bits and pieces. What actually is the Narragunnawali platform? So it's actually an online platform that supports, as we saw earlier in that circle, the program areas within Narragunnawali. So as you can see across the top there, we have our RAPs, so literally an online tool to build a reconciliation action plan if you're a school or an early learning service. We have our professional learning, which aligns back to those RAP actions that you saw, those commitments in that framework. Curriculum resources to also support the implementation of those actions. So we wanted it all to be kind of easier for teachers to know that they're developing a RAP and you can be supporting reconciliation and your reconciliation commitments in a school by using these professional learning tools and resources, which are aligned to the Australian Professional Standards for Teachers, and also these curriculum resources, which are aligned to the Australian Curriculum and the Early Years Learning Framework. So we really wanted to make it easier for our teachers and educators and schools as a whole to be able to holistically and effectively work towards these things. We also have there that last little bit of our awards as well, and we'll touch on that a little bit more. But this is the page, or what it actually physically looks like when you go to the Narragunnawali platform. As we mentioned before, we also then have those list of actions that we saw in that framework. They are listed under the RAPS tab, and you can have a look at all of those in detail. But the reason we actually wanted to pull attention to these is we actually wanted to kind of articulate that a RAP action page, which is those commitments, each RAP action has a page that you can go to, and which we'll show on the next slide, where it actually is a resource unto itself. So when we go into we can see there the build relationships with community, which is has a little star next to it, namely that it is such, one of those 14 minimally required commitments to have a RAP, as we know, across any RAP that we're doing. But essentially those RAP action pages have the little tabs there you can see across the screen. So we've got an overview, which is really important, it has some information. Then also we need the need to know. So we deep dive into what building relationships with community looks like, feels like, what some guiding information about what that could mean, what you might need to know when you endeavouring to do that effectively and respectfully. Then we've got the Ideas for Action tab, which ties into that RAP development process of giving schools and early learning services ideas of how that action, building relationships with community, what that can actually look like, and really tangible examples of what that looks like in practice. And then, as I mentioned before, we've also then got the professional learning and the curriculum resources, which align back to that RAP action as well. So as you saw before in the framework, we have those 14 minimally required RAP actions for schools and early learning services, but we have that list of about 40 across the whole framework there that schools and early learning services can commit to. And under each of those, every page looks like this with that same guiding information for what that particularly is. So just a quick touch on the RAPs side of things of the Narragunnawali platform. This is what a school will see when they have started to develop their RAP on the platform. So if you're part of a RAP working group currently, or that you're involved in, you might have seen this page. So that might be familiar to you, but if not, this is sort of one aspect of the platform and an area that, particularly if you're on a RAP working group or are planning to be on a RAP working group, that you'll be able to become quite familiar with this page, where we can see the steps of developing a RAP there. And if you are wanting a little bit more information surrounding that, I really encourage you to visit the What is a RAP page. There's a cute little, really easy to watch tutorial video about those steps. So if that's something you would like to have a look at, that for sure. Yeah, I think we're up to that next bit. Go for it, Sarojni.
So once you've developed a RAP and it's formally endorsed through Reconciliation Australia, this is a little glimpse of of the final product. Beautiful printable document that goes through the contents, your vision, your governance structure with your RAP working group, the positions that each individual holds, and then you've got all those actions, the commitments, who it's assigned to, and then you've got also this lovely poster that you can print off and put in your school or early learning services front office, and you know, frame it up and have it all there captured, which is quite lovely.
So sorry.
No, over to you. No.
Another great feature on the Narragunnawali platform, which can be useful for organisations, is actually our Who Has a RAP map. And so you can have a look and see any of all those little red little pin drops are actually schools and early learning services with public RAPs. So if you're wanting to kind of have a look and see what schools in your particular sphere of influence, or early learning services, in your sphere of influence that you might be able to engage with or might be connected to, this is an area that you can go and you can actually have a look and see who's got a RAP around particularly your connections, and that might be a way to be able to reach out and be able to help each other.
We also here with the Narragunnawali program have some fantastic webinars that you can register and watch at your leisure. We also have the fantastic Narragunnawali Awards, where we recognise, promote and support and showcase fantastic reconciliation in schools and early learning services across Australia. And we also have a newsletter as well, so highly recommend signing up and to the newsletter, where we showcase what's happening across Australia reconciliation related.
So that leads me into the next kind of another aspect of the Narragunnawali platform, which might particularly be really useful for you guys as organisation and RAP partners, is the professional learning tab, and all of the professional learning resources are actually applicable kind of to any sort of staff. So while there are definitely examples on there that are under that tab that are very obviously school-based, as that is our main audience, there are so many on there as well that are actually can be very easily adapted to any set of staff. So if you're looking for ideas on how to build staff engagement with your RAP, or to have sort of conversations around certain things or activities about how to look at certain topics in reconciliation or across Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander histories and cultures more generally. There are definitely ways in which you can change or alter those inquiry questions or adapt them. Sorry, that's the word I was looking for, or the activity to suit your staff and your organisation. So the one that we wanted to kind of really pull on today was the learning, unlearning and relearning journey. And we're going to get a little bit more into that after this, into the discussion. But the video that we're about to share, there's a whole activity on this particular journey that all of us as Australians go through as learning, unlearning and relearning. So I'll let the video do the talking, but we'll come back to that afterwards.
The moment that I understood that reconciliation could change everything was when I saw the possibilities of what I could do as a non-Indigenous teacher to support the children and the families and the communities I taught.
I grew up in a town where Indigenous people weren't respected and it wasn't always nice.
When I grew up, I didn't know anything except negative things about First Peoples cultures.
I grew up not understanding the Aboriginal cultures and sort of being part of that biased stigma.
I had to uneducate myself on a lot of things that I'd been brought up with, and I had to re-educate myself about Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander culture.
It's all about changing the mindset and rewriting the 100 years of education and miseducation.
The kids should have a right to want to learn the oldest living culture that's still surviving today.
Reconciliation, for me personally, is very much about connecting with a history that I really felt I was denied when I was at school. I feel I've been really quite cheated by that, and I have made a real commitment now as a teacher to make that change.
We were taught that there were no Aborigines left in Tasmania, but there certainly is.
I didn't know the original custodians of our land.
Reconciliation helps non-Indigenous people because it helps them understand what they're missing out on and what they don't know about. It's been such an amazing experience for the whole family to be more gelled with the community.
Cass has introduced us to a whole lot of new words for animals, and we now incorporate that into our language at home.
There's been a real move. The kids at Assembly acknowledge country, and that makes me feel really culturally safe. I love working here because of that. We've had Indigenous students here as well, and them and their families would feel that cultural safety.
The umbrella for Aboriginal education has broadened to include not just our Aboriginal kids and families, but everyone in our community.
As parents, it's really important to let your children have their own views on certain things and being open. A big challenge in the community is people influencing what the next generation are thinking.
There's intergenerational learning happening, and we even see that with the grandparents. Their knowledge of First People was probably more in that negative space, and they're coming to understand that their grandchildren are teaching them that there's another way to know.
We can teach the children not to be biased and have social justice for all people that live here. Difference is okay, and we can celebrate that difference.
As an Australian, it makes me proud to think that schools are teaching the complete history of Australia and not just bits of it. I'm proud to think that there will be a generation of kids, and hopefully many generations of non-Indigenous kids, going out into the community with that greater understanding of what has gone before to make sure that it is better in the future.
So as we saw there, we're coming to the end of the presentation part really shortly, but I feel that and the feedback that we've had from that particular film is that a lot of parents and people in our community who are part of the workforce as an adult now really can relate to a lot of those particular sort of views in that, you know, that our education journey as adults is a completely different experience to our kids and young people today. So there's this sort of gap between some of those particular learning journeys, and that's why I guess for us, and we'll get into this a little bit more into the discussion, but why we really have to reflect on our own learning as well as how we can support schools and early learning services. You know, there's these two sort of learning journeys that are concurrently happening. So I guess some of the prompts, in a sense of, as we know that the sort of theme of reconciliation with the 2021 State of Reconciliation report is moving from safe to brave. So how are we, what does that actually mean to you, and what does that mean in relation to reconciliation, and perhaps bringing in some of that unlearning and having to unlearn what we learned through school and through our early years of our education journeys. But also, thinking about what actions you can be taking to move that safe to brave, and what's, starting from that small space of what's that next one action that you can take. So I guess it's a nice way to be thinking about is as we continue through to the discussion, what that means to you. And feel free, please, if you feel comfortable, to share that within the chat box as well. We welcome any reflections as we're going through. This is a safe space to share that. So please feel free to do that, as well as your questions as well. Yeah. I think we're almost ready with that particular, finishing up our presentation, and we might ask, I think it's Amy coming back onto screen in a minute, and she can get us started with some of those discussion questions. But as we said, please feel free to pop any that you might have that have cropped up from any of the things that we've talked about, or anything in the films that we've talked about too. We'd be more than happy to answer those.
Thanks, Alanna. Great presentation, you guys. I have a few questions here to reflect on as we go through into our discussion portion of the session today. The last video there was, really, really important, and it makes me think about how there has been inadequate or simply a lack of education about First Nations cultures, places, and achievements in Australia, and as well as back home in Canada. For me, it's a discussion we're having at a national level as well. Do you guys have any more you want to kind of share about that relearning, or unlearning and relearning process?
Yeah, I guess I'll jump in just really quickly in that sense of we are aware, and you might be becoming more aware, that our education system from when we were at school as adults didn't do us any justice to learn about Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander histories, perspectives, peoples. Even we know for a fact that first languages and first Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander ways of being were pretty much systematically not a part of the curriculum, and also not allowed to, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children weren't allowed to be themselves in education systems up until this point. So I think that we are luckily moving into this different space, but with that comes, I think, the challenging aspect of, as some of the parents in the video mentioned, that their children are coming home with this type of information that we didn't have a chance to necessarily learn, unless you were in a particular circumstance where you were able to be celebrate and able to know that stuff as you were growing up. So I think we need to reflect on that and understand that, while that was our experience a lot of the time, and for a lot of people in our community, that was, the way that the Australian education system set us up. But now I think what I can hopefully pass on is, as we saw in the video too, is that parents and the workforce, really adult workforce, are feeling quite empowered to be like, oh, well, I can actually take charge of my own learning, and I can understand that my schooling experience didn't give me the learning that I should have had, and that is hopefully being afforded to kids in schools now, but that you have a little bit that you might have to go on a bit of a unlearning journey to then relearn things in a respectful and in a detail orientated, and where I think it's a very teacher-esque kind of way of thinking of things, but we're all lifelong learners. That's essentially what hopefully we're setting up our learners and our young people to be, is lifelong learners, and to really be able to take ownership of that. So yeah, I really encourage everyone to hopefully go, okay, sit with that. I didn't learn this at school. I can now embark on that now and further my learning. Sarojni?
Yeah, I was just going to mirror the same thing, Alanna, in that throughout my time at RA and also just growing up as an Aboriginal person in the Northern Territory and now living in Canberra, I've seen a sort of growing wave of adults, community members, kids, just being open to having that conversation and asking the questions around First Nations people, and it's actually really quite refreshing to see that kids, they just get it. They just seem to get the concepts really quite quickly and simply, and it's just business as usual. Sometimes as adults, I think it's a little bit challenging to sort of think about our own thoughts around stereotypes and our own beliefs and challenge them on an individual level. But it's great to see that people are being more open to having those conversations, to challenging themselves, and just embracing one of the oldest living cultures in the world and having that shared identity and being proud of it is really, it's a wonderful space to be in. So.
Yeah, thank you for your reflections on that, you guys. I think one thing that you both said that really resonated with me is that you need to take charge of your own learning and really understand that shared identity as all people living on these lands, and even that learning in between different generations, and how you're saying it comes easy for children and sometimes it's passed all the way up the chain, or vice versa. For example, like my grandmother, my kukum, she's recently started taking Cree lessons, which is our Indigenous language back home. And because she was discouraged from learning it when she was a young person, her parents even told her, what's the point? We're not going to teach you it, even though she can understand it and hear it. But now she's, taking that upon herself to learn the language and share little bits and pieces with us along the way. So it's a really beautiful journey. On to our next question here. I'm thinking, how can parents and community members get more involved in this reconciliation work and with RAPS?
Yeah, great question. And thanks for sharing your reflection too. I think it's really in a way that I think from that perspective of sometimes Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people have to reconnect with westernized kind of ways of education too. And that obviously as a part of our cultures, Indigenous cultures across the world, education has been there the whole entire time. So I think that's, we have our own systems of education, and they aren't necessarily recognised or haven't been recognised in a long time due to sort of the effects of colonisation and things. So I think that's quite a, not unfortunately, and not a unique story across the Indigenous peoples across our world, but hopefully we're at that point now where we're coming back, where not only are non-Indigenous people across the world, but also in our country are being able to learn about respectfully, but then also bringing in that side of that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander ways of being and learning, and more broadly Indigenous peoples across the world are being accepted as educational systems and ways of learning too. So it's kind of a two-way, which is really great. In terms of how parents and community members can be involved, I guess one of the ways when I was working at a school, as I was a teacher before, or still am a teacher, before being part of the Narragunnawali team, was that we had a really active P&C, Parents and Communities Committee. So again, trying to be, not only can you be involved, I guess on a really literal level, in being part of the existing sort of initiatives that are there to engage parents and community members. As we know, parents are such a huge stakeholder in any educational setting. And so I think being able to utilise your role there and bring not only your knowledge as a stakeholder in any child's educational journey that you may be connected to, or any school that you may be connected to, but also your knowledge of being a RAP partner. You're bringing your own knowledge in that Narragunnawali RAPs and RAPs for organisations are linked and are working towards the same things, just perhaps in slightly different ways. So being able to utilize that, your knowledge will be, and your experience in your workplace will be useful and valued on not only the, as I said, existing sort of parent stakeholders ways of being involved in a school, but also thinking about if checking whether the schools that you're connected to have a RAP currently, or have one in draft form, or have they started one yet? And excuse me, being proactive in kind of going, oh, just wondering, could I be a part of the RAP working group? My child goes to this school and you're, you know, or you might like to be part of the reconciliation network for that particular RAP. There's a couple of ways that you can be involved, but yeah, being able to kind of be confident and take part of that moving from safe to brave might be taking action for you. And so that might be your one thing that you sort of step into and go, yeah, I'm going to be a part of the RAP working group, or I'm going to be on the PNC and talk about how the PNC can support reconciliation in a school or early learning service too. So that's my 2 cents.
Well, I might chime in and give some advice. So in the COVID world, I'd highly recommend that everyone goes online and register for webinars that are, there's a plethora out there, and go on your own individual learning journeys and utilize resources that are out there, including the ones on the Narragunnawali platform, and sort of deep dive into your own learning. I'd also engage and support your local schools or organisations around learning about your local traditional custodians. I think you'd be sort of inspired and surprised at what's out there at the moment. I'd also reach out to other like-minded organisations and discuss, create, and have a think about ways that you can collaborate with one another to generate, you know, meaningful opportunities within your sphere of influence, so that you can sort of, you know, better support your community, you know, create opportunities, and, you know, and create meaningful relationships as well. I'd be signing up to your local school's newsletter and get your organisation at your local school and early learning service to sort of, you know, be across what's happening, and be a part of the dialogue of what's going on in your local community.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. And, you know, along with the importance of engaging in those multiple ways, what is the value and importance of making sure you have parents' voices on these RAP working groups?
Oh, it's a really key, as I mentioned before, any educational setting needs to have a parent voice. So any initiative, any type of educational activity that is happening within a school, so much of what teachers and educational staff do within a school is to do with having a really respectful and two-way reciprocal partnership with the stakeholders that you're sort of working with. And as I mentioned before, one of those is parents. And so from a perspective of any school initiative, but including reconciliation, it is actually so important that we hear from parents about what types of initiatives that you would like to see from your parent perspective in your child's educational journey. You know, is there things to do with what they're learning in their classrooms, and what you believe, based on even potentially your own experiences of school, what you would like to see in our classrooms today and in your child's classroom. Or, you know, even just the fact of, as I mentioned before, you can be wearing your parent hat when you go and sort of give advice and be a part of these particular things, but you're also bringing your experiences and your experience with reconciliation outside of the school too. So you're bringing, you know, that extra value add from the perspectives that you bring. But then also, I think that works in a really nice two-way relationship too, in that you can then obviously take, there might be some things of working with the RAP working group, particularly in a school, that you might be able to take back to your workplace and be able to. So I think that really opens up that really, as I mentioned before, we're all working towards reconciliation. So I think that is a really nice way to sort of concurrently work towards the same thing in different ways.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I guess vice versa, how can RAP partners as part of workplace organizations, how can they get involved in local education initiatives in their area or community?
Sorry, still working out my technology. That's okay. Yeah, look, there are a lot of ways in which workplaces can get involved. As I previously mentioned, utilising, having a look at the services that your organisation delivers to your stakeholders, and looking at the uniqueness of your sphere of influence, not only internally, but externally as well to community, and figure out ways in which you can tap into that to make a meaningful impact, not only to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples, but for all Australians, to drive reconciliation, I would say.
Awesome. So you guys mentioned in your presentation the 2021 State of Reconciliation report. And one thing within the report, we know there's a key recommended action that is to celebrate, promote, and enhance public education about First Peoples history, culture, and achievements. Do you have any stories of approaches that have worked well that you've seen?
Yeah, look, I've come across quite a few. One of our lovely RAP partners, Edmund Wise Education Australia, they developed and implemented this waterhole exercise cultural awareness activity for their students. And it was based, it's an exercise on truth-telling in history, and it's sort of an immersion program, and it asks participants to physically walk in the footsteps of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples of Australia on country, and get a sense and a feel of what it was and what it is, and being connected to country. We also have fantastic universities across the board doing fantastic things, including completing curriculum audits, ensuring that their courses are culturally sensitive, and we also see National Reconciliation Week events across Australia, where community members, kids, schools, everybody comes together and shares, learns and shares, wonderful experiences of, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples, cultures, histories, and promoting that shared identity. So it's great to see.
Awesome. Thank you, Sarojni. I'm going to move into some of the Q&A that we've gotten from the audience so far. One question is about the acronyms you guys used. I think it's the early years learning framework, but like the EYLF and then the MTOP. Can you explain a little bit what those are and what the principles are, just in a little bit more detail for
Yeah, of course. So, and this is where, again, so my, as a teacher, as a primary teacher, my, I guess, area of, I am used to teaching, for example, the Australian curriculum or the New South Wales curriculum, but I definitely learnt a lot when I came to Narragunnawali about the early learning side of things. So the EYLF is the Early Years Learning Framework, which pretty much underpins how the early learning sector delivers their educational programs and things like that. So they have a various list of principles which are similar to what's expected in schools, but basically it is about belonging, being and becoming, and for early learning. So it really just kind of underpins exactly what needs to be included, same as the version of, I guess, the Australian curriculum or state-based curriculum for early learning is what that one is. And then the MyTYP is the My Time, Our Place, and that's basically the framework which exists to be able to for early school-aged care, so after-school cares and OSH centres and things like that. They also have programs and like curriculum kind of things that requirements from a national framework perspective that they need to adhere to. So yeah, it's basically just those types of principles and things like that. You can definitely, I think I'll pop them in the chat box if it's useful that everyone, there's a document that explains it all basically. But I guess the point of it being is that it's exciting that it's in these national frameworks that's being expected across educational journeys from early learning all the way through to tertiary education. So yeah, just a bit of that background of the educational kind of spectrum.
That's perfect. I guess that kind of leads into this next question about asking, typically how long would it take to develop a RAP for an early learning center of about 40 people?
Yeah, that's another great question. And I think it really depends because I guess the process of developing a RAP obviously has 4 steps that you need to go through, but how long each step takes is really dependent on where your school is at, your school's individual journey that is happening and things like that. So what is really important, apologies, there's a door slam, is really, I think, rather than like you might be able to have your RAP developed in a month, say, for example, or it might take you 6 months. At the end of the day, there's no kind of right or wrong answer. I guess it's more about the process rather than, and I think what's really encouraging is to know that a RAP is a plan, like it is literally a reconciliation action plan. So you can definitely look into all the things, as I mentioned. There's a reflection survey, which allows you to look at what you're doing really well, and then also what your areas to strengthen might be. So taking the time to do that, you might be able to knock that over in a week, for example, or in one session. But, for your school, is it important to send that out to parents to get their perspective and then feed, there's a lot of support in each of the steps to kind of go, this is what you need to do to develop a RAP, but how can this process really help you and your school do that in a meaningful way? So in that sense, where however long it does take you to get to that point, it's about probably a 2-week turnaround from our end of things to when your RAP comes to us. So there's a couple of steps where it's in draft form, gets submitted to your principal or director, and then once they're happy with it and approve it, they then send it to us here at Reconciliation Australia. So there's usually about a 2-week turnaround when it gets to that point. But my suggestion in that sense is to just stay true to the process and think about it as the journey rather than necessarily the destination would probably be my suggestion.
Look, and I also might just say that, some organisations, they like to do, thorough consultation, get buy-in from community, and really evaluate, do a bit of an audit and get a reflection of where they're currently at, as Alanna said. Others just want to sort of, jump in and, and start the process and get a sense and a feel of what these commitments look like, on the ground and sort of build upon that as it happens. So there can be a quick turnaround or it can be quite long. Also having a look at, your vision. So what is your vision for reconciliation as a school early learning service? And that sometimes takes time too to figure out, what it actually means to you. And yeah, the reflection survey is a great one to sort of get a sense of where you're at. So yeah.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. That was a really good response and explaining, the different steps of that whole process. And I really like that you're explaining to that it is that journey and it's not going to be the same for everyone. Everyone has to reflect on their own local circumstances for sure. One of the other questions is asking whether you guys work with KESOs, so Quarry Support Officers. Do you guys have any involvement with them?
Yeah, KESOs, I'm pretty sure the acronym. We have, I think they're another thing that being New South Wales based, I was like, oh, there's all these different acronyms for the same people in different states, which was interesting. So I guess in the sense of we definitely push for schools and early learning services to engage with the people that they have in their particular context. So that can involve CASOs, it can involve Aboriginal education workers in New South Wales or officers in New South Wales. Again, the acronyms might change, but I guess those Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander identified positions that work in our education places of education, around our country, they are definitely part and should be included. I guess and this is where, again, you've got to have that relationship on the ground to really sort of work out what that means for that sort of individual person or individual community, because there might be some Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people that are really, yes, I want to be a part of the right working group. I am happy to, be really involved and to have a really active voice and be, but there also might be Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people that also might not want to be the driving force for a reconciliation action plan, for example, because they're already doing the work that they need to do in that role. And so just because, I think, being aware, this might not be a new message, but like being aware that just because someone is Aboriginal doesn't mean that they have to give everything that they have to the reconciliation action plan journey. So really kind of through building those genuine, respectful, reciprocal partnerships, you can really work out what's going to work best for the individuals in your particular context. And that goes for Aboriginal teachers too, in that they already have a job and are doing that job in that space as well, and are already, have so much knowledge and experience to bring to any of those conversations, but also just being aware to be like, oh, do you have space to talk about this today? Or be able to are you okay with being involved in, running a whole school assembly for, the anchor points of NRW or NAIDOC or, I guess it's just really pushing that point about you should definitely be working with your local community, but through building relationships to really work out how best you can support your, and that the community can drive their involvement, and that lastly that you need those voices and you need those perspectives to be able to demonstrate how you can best support your community from your end of things, but also that if you're still in those beginning stages of developing relationships and things like that, I guess while that's going on, working on the things that you can do for that, like further your own learning, being involved, as Sarojni said, in webinars and things like that, so that you're building your own awareness about how to do that as well. Yeah, that was a really long way. I hope that makes sense.
No, definitely. It's definitely still encouraging to get involved with your Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander stakeholders and connections to community, but being cognizant of the cultural load that can put on those individuals, I think is really key for us all to keep in mind in this work. Next question, we are asked about, what kind of suggestions do you guys have for parents approaching a school to ask if the school has a RAP or is considering developing a RAP? What good kind of tips would you give parents?
I guess I'll jump in for 2 seconds just from the perspective of, firstly, a lot of the time, a lot of my parents that I had their child in my class, for example, they had a connection and great relationship with me. So they reached out through their child's particular teacher or teachers, is a good place to start if you have a great relationship there. But also you can then, little things like really practically, you can email the school and just ask and just say, look, I'm just wondering, I've recently heard about our workplace has a RAP, I'm just wondering, that kind of thing. You can also go, start that conversation and they might respond back to you and ask, for you to come in for a meeting or things like that. And you can, if they haven't heard of Narragunnawali or RAPs or Reconciliation Australia in general, you can sort of bring that information and be like, I'm involved in this particular school and I would really love for us to, be on this journey. But also a lot of the time too, you can have a look at their newsletters and things like that to see what kind of a lot of the time schools feature that type of information in a way that you can access. So you can kind of do, I guess, a little bit of research first and have a look at their school website, have a look at their newsletters and see what they kind of are doing already. And then, yeah, preface a, give them a call, or I'm not sure what schools are doing these days in terms of, I think visitors are only just allowed back in again. So in terms of COVID, being mindful of what the expectations are for non-teaching staff, people in a school. But definitely, yeah, I speak from the perspective of my school was always really, give the front office a call. You might have come in and have a meeting with a teacher or even the principal or things like that, to just sort of be able to here's what I think and what I can help you with, hopefully. That would be my suggestion from being in that context.
I was going to say, there's no harm in asking the question. So, just popping into the office, having a bit of a chat, perhaps even just forwarding our details, the Narragunnawali team's email inbox, and maybe getting us in contact with your school or early learning service. So we're here to support you guys as well, and to help, provide any and all support and information as possible to get schools and early learning services up and running.
Excellent, thanks guys. Another question here is asking about, how do you find government schools when they are developing their own individual RAPs versus maybe a statewide approach or policy coming down at that level? Do you ever find any tensions or I'm not sure how that process works, if it's coming down, I guess, from the top versus if they're developing it own individually.
Yeah, that's a great question. I was actually just looking at that in the Q&A, actually. And I think from my perspective, what we see from Narragunnawali is that because reconciliation action plans aren't essentially policy enforced, so every school that signs up to Narragunnawali to develop a RAP is doing so in a way under their own volition, I guess, of choosing, we want to make a formal commitment to reconciliation. And I guess when it comes to, for example, early learning services who have their organisation has an umbrella RAP as well, that is what I think is deemed, is being chosen as a, and Sarojni can come in here in a second, but I guess that's a priority for that particular. So I think that you definitely, as with anything, you definitely come up with challenges. These processes aren't easy and they are ongoing. I think that's the other thing too. Once you have a RAP, that's great. It's definitely the first step or a step in that moves towards that. But I think then where sometimes the some of the tension or the challenging parts from then on can come is through that refresh process and being able to be, your reconciliation action plan should be an active living document. It's not a stagnant piece of paper. It's something that is alive and being enacted every single day in the ways in which you work. And hopefully also in what I've heard too is that many people start to realize the ramifications or the effects in their own personal lives too, that it goes to the wider parts of not just their professional life, but their personal life too. So I guess it really depends on the support that's out there too. So if it is coming from the top down to engage in Narragunnawali and to make a RAP, then that also potentially needs to be supported with how to do that. And I feel like that might be a good segue into Sarojni.
Yeah, so again, there's the workplace RAP and then there's the Narragunnawali RAP. And when we're looking at umbrella organisations that have multiple early learning services or school subsidiaries that sit underneath, the technicalities and the minutiae of the frameworks, there's actually, with the workplace RAPs, we're asking organisations to develop, strategies around procurement, employment, cultural learning, engagement with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, stakeholders and businesses. Those strategies and policies then form the foundation that then sort of trickles down to all those early learning services and schools. With the Narragunnawali RAPs, obviously, where we're focusing on the context of the school, in the community, in the classroom, and what those actions look like. There can be that's where the differences are, and both sort of do intersect. But the workplace RAP that sits on sort of at the head office is there to support these schools and early learning services in developing an environment and a culture that is inclusive, diverse, it's sensitive, and through that, obviously accessing the Narragunnawali resources, developing a RAP, and that does take time. There are obviously every organisation gets it right, and we're all on the learning journey. So what does an effective Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander engagement protocol look like, and or procurement strategy or employment strategy. So each organisation is trialling and testing and figuring out what works and what doesn't work, and how they can do it better, and how they can support their educators, their teachers, their parents and their kids. So it's a fantastic thing to see is that there is a growing number of umbrella organisations that not only have workplace RAPs that have specifically committed to promoting the Narragunnawali program within their framework, but doing so, for the betterment of their educators. So that's fantastic to hear and see.
Definitely. And Sarojni, I like how you emphasize that, organizations aren't necessarily going to get it right the first time, and that's totally okay. It shouldn't hinder or stop you from trying to engage. And I think that action imperfectly is better than no action at all. So I'm going to squeeze in one last question here, guys, before we finish up. One of our people on the conference, they work at an early learning center, and they're asking if it's okay to approach other early learning centers in their local area that have a RAP to get ideas about how to develop a RAP themselves.
Yeah, I think, I guess from that perspective of you already have a network in your local community across the centres and schools as well. And reconciliation is also just one of those points that you can touch base on and, send an email and say, oh, by the way, I had a look on the Who Has a RAP map and I saw that your centre has a public RAP. Would it be all right? What if we started a conversation, or, and if, we're just starting to develop ours, what did you find? And I think it's obviously up to the prerogative of that centre to be like, yeah, sure. Or to, be like, oh, maybe in a couple of months, we've got to, whatever that happens to be on the ground. But I definitely think as you would sort of reach out for support for the community and to come at the end of the day, if you're geographically in the same area, you might be working towards different things and be slightly different in the way that you're doing things in your centres or your schools. That's obviously definitely schools and early learning centres have unique identities within that. But at the same time, you're also delivering a very similar service a lot of the time when you're early learning centres and things like that. So getting ideas, we'd really like to build, that you are a part of the Narragunnawali community of practice and that we are all here to work towards the same things, and that by being able to see the early learning services visions and things like that of public RAPs, you can definitely learn in that way too, but it definitely is worth on the ground just reaching out and, as Sarojni said, ask the question. And yeah, the only silly question is the unasked one. So
yeah, thanks Alanna. Sarojni?
Yeah, the one great thing about being part of the RAP network or the reconciliation cohort is that You know, we're all here to support each other. And one of the great things about that is, you know, not having to reinvent the wheel, and sort of, you know, ask the question of, you know, how did you do this? You know, is there a better way to do this? Can we collaborate with one another? You know, can we join forces and come up with some great ideas? And that's probably one of the fantastic things about being part of this group, is that you're not alone. We're all in this journey together, and we're here to support each other. So that's great.
Another little quick point on that too is that we do have a great partnership with our state reconciliation councils as well. So they are also another resource that schools and early learning services, as well as organisations, can reach out to for support as well. So definitely chuck that into Google, literally state reconciliation councils in each of the states, and that can also be another avenue for a resource and advice and guidance as well.
Yeah, definitely. All right, guys, well, I'm going to wrap up the session here. Thank you so much for your presentation. Learned lots about Narragunnawali and the work you guys do with reconciliation in the education sector. I really enjoyed this afternoon's discussion. I hope everyone on our session did as well. And yeah, feel free to reach out to the Reconciliation Australia team or Narragunnawali with any more specific questions on this topic. All right, thanks, guys.
Thanks so much, guys. We're always here. Send us an email and or contact us, and we're always here to answer and help in any way we can. So thanks so much, everyone, for your time today. And thanks, Amy.
Thanks. Have a great day, all.